I had the chance, like you did, to listen to Mr. West, and he was magnificent. But I also noticed that there are about twice as many people then. So they're out there in those halls. Let's get them back here, okay? I want to tell you a true story about my life in the past week. Last Saturday, I got in my car in Long Island, and I drove across the Throgs Neck Bridge, and I came to Cardinal Spellman High School at my allotted time. And I went to the gym, and there were no tables set up. And I came to this auditorium, and they were rehearsing a play. And I saw one of the kids on their school soccer team, and I said, "Where are the 1,000 people for Divine Mercy?" "Hey, Father, I think that's next week." So this is my second visit within a week to beautiful Cardinal Spellman High School. Glad to be back. But I think there may be a pattern happening here related to getting older. The day before last Saturday, I went to bless a house in my parish, and I had done the wedding for the couple a few years before, and I knew they had a new baby and new house, so I went to the house, and I knocked on the door, and the woman comes to the door with her baby, and I, being way too friendly, step into the house, and I go and give the woman a kiss. And she says, "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Monsignor Lisante. You asked me to bless your house." "No, I didn't." No. This is the Conti family, right? They moved from here about 6 months ago. I'm the nanny of this baby, and I thought of calling the police when you just did that to me, Father. She gave me their new address, and I went and blessed the Conti house. But I kissed a strange woman last week in a strange house. So this is the Divine Mercy Conference, right? Now, if you got to see the brochure or the poster, you saw one of the truly most ugly pictures of me I've ever taken. I look like Donald Trump on a bad day. Okay. But the good thing about that poster and the flyer is that 3 photographers have contacted me to say, "Let me take your picture for you, will you?" So some of you have asked me when I was out in the hall about my sainted 97-year-old mother, who I talk about so often, and she, thank God, is doing okay, and praying for you guys, as I hope you're praying for her. She said to me last week, I made a plan with her that starting tomorrow, I'm going to move in with her for the next 2 weeks to help with her care. And the first thing she said was, "You can take me out for dinner a lot, right?" "Sure, Mom, I'd be glad to do it. I'm gifted to do that." So I like to shock her once in a while. So I say things to her that are just to get a rise out of her. So we're out to dinner this past week, and the food was wonderful at the restaurant. I said, "Mom, this food is so good, it's better than sex." To which she quickly responded, "And you know that how?" "I read Mr. West's book, Mom." Anyway, let's talk about Divine Mercy today, and hopefully we'll learn some things together. New way of seeing Divine Mercy. Divine Mercy, at the end of the day, if we're really honest, is not all that complicated, the message itself, because it comes down to the living out, it seems to me, of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But we know that. And we know that Jesus, in teaching that, was teaching something that he inherited from his Jewish heritage. But here's the issue for all of us. How do I do it, and how do I do it effectively? And it seems to me that to be able to live the golden rule, which is at the heart of Divine Mercy, we have to first and foremost develop in ourselves the capacity to be truly empathetic. And you know, and I know, I hope we do, the difference between sympathy and empathy. 27 years ago, 37 years ago, I'm off by a decade, when I was a newly ordained priest, I would go to visit the sick. When I would go to the funeral home or to do a funeral, I would try to give consolation to those who had lost a loved one. And I know that I said the words that you say to someone to make them more comforted. I think I said them sincerely. But I know what I was offering back then was sympathy. I was talking to them about their pain, but from a disconnect. And the disconnect is I had not walked in their shoes. 37 years later, I have lost people I love deeply. I've gone through the experience of death and sickness with those who I care about. And so when I go to visit someone in the hospital, or when I go to walk with someone through their journey of illness or addiction or the loss of a loved one, it's now something closer to my heart because it's no longer being offered at the level of sympathy, but at the level of empathy. I know something of what you're going through because I have walked in your shoes. I have shared in the journey. I have shared in the pain. I've shared in the loss. And for us to be instruments of divine mercy, it seems to me, we do that by living the golden rule. The golden rule is lived by saying, I won't just have bad feelings for what you're suffering. I will enter into the mystery of your suffering through empathy. And if we can do that and apply that empathy, I think it can take every major social issue you and I read about every day and hear about everywhere, and we can become, in each of those issues, instruments of divine mercy. Let's go through some contemporary issues that you and I hear about and maybe get involved in all the time. Let's start with infidelity. It's everywhere. Unfaithfulness is rampant. I've worked for many years on a program called Retrovi, a weekend for couples in trouble. And on Retrovi, people seem to face three substantial difficulties. One is finances. The other is a failure to communicate. But the third, enchilada, is always about infidelity. Now, we live in this so-called enlightened and liberated age where we're told that people are not as uptight about sex as they once were. The reality is for every priest that the majority of couples coming to be married by us are already living together, already very sexually active. So sex is supposed to be this now free-thinking thing that we're not uptight about anymore. But I'll tell you what I've learned in 37 years of being a priest. I have yet to meet anyone, husband or wife, boyfriend or girlfriend, who finds out that the person they love has been unfaithful and who doesn't end up with a broken heart. The universal truth is that it's a lie to say we can have sex without consequence. And when you or I are put in the position of saying, I wonder what it would be like to have somebody else besides my wife or my husband. I wonder what it would like to be loved by someone different. When we consider the possibility of being unfaithful, and it's very tempting, I think we need to go back to the golden rule and ask ourselves, if it was me who was being cheated on, if it was me being betrayed, you know and I know my heart would be broken. Why? Because sex does still matter, and it's not the same as a handshake, and it in fact has a powerful hold on our hearts. One of the ways we become instruments of divine mercy and people of empathy is to say, what would it be like if? And I'm telling you, in every case where a person has been cheated on, where they've been betrayed, your heart is broken. Why, if sex doesn't matter, should that matter? Because sex does matter. It's a way in which we share with each other deeply and profoundly. And when somebody breaks that trust, it hurts enormously. One of the ways in which we address infidelity is by saying, I know for sure I wouldn't like it if somebody did it to me, therefore I will not do it to another. And we're all tempted every day. If you're not tempted, you're not alive. One of the people I interviewed, who was a great interviewer, is Drew Brees. And Drew is, as you probably know, quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And I said, okay, Drew, you're smart, you're successful, you're rich, you're handsome, you're a good athlete, you're on the road a lot. Are you ever tempted to be unfaithful to your wife? And he said, no, I'm not, and I'll tell you why, Father. He said, you know, I played for San Diego, I ruined my shoulder. He said, I kept at night moving around so much that I was pulling out the stitches, pulling out the posts. I was ruining things. My wife, for 1 year, he said, slept with her hand on my shoulder just so that I wouldn't mess up my surgery and the recovery. You don't jeopardize a relationship like that for a stupid fling. Anyway, that was a beautiful story to tell. After it was over, Brittany, his wife, came out of the green room. We were doing this for TV, and she said, he didn't tell you the whole story. I said, what's the whole story? Well, he told you about the shoulder, but he didn't mention that for 1 year, I also had to wipe his butt. Now that's love, okay? And that's the kind of thing you do when you're faithful and true, because you love without conditions. Go back to my point. For us to avoid infidelity, cheating, being unfaithful, we have only to ask ourselves, how would I feel if it were done to me? Let's go to another issue. Immigration. It's big, it's hot, it's controversial, and I think we all at the end of the day agree. Wouldn't it be great if, whether it was President Clinton, President George W., President Obama, President Trump, somebody somewhere could come up with a legal solution to this thing and it wouldn't go on forever as this nightmare that we face and divides our country? Wouldn't it be nice? Having said that, we need, in our heart of hearts, to get hold of what it must be like, because I think more than you know, you have empathy for that undocumented person. If you had a kid who you knew probably wouldn't have his next meal, if you knew you were living in a country where they kill people for no reason, if you know there was no future for you or your family, if you knew it was a hopeless situation and that the people you love would probably end up dead if they stayed, is there any one of us who would not, in fact, do whatever we could to get to a place of safety? This past week, I interviewed, and I know many of you know her, Lydia Bastianich, the cook, the chef. And she talks about what it was like to be a refugee in Yugoslavia under Tito, communism, and how they left everything they had. They weren't poor, but for freedom, they left and lived for several years in a refugee camp in Italy until finally, through Catholic charities, they were brought to this country. And she said, I sometimes forget, now that I'm in America and I'm successful, I sometimes forget what it was like to be totally lost with no hope except the possibility, if we can just make it to America, we and our children will have a future. See, if you and I can, like Lydia, put ourselves in the position of saying, I'm not sympathetic to people breaking the law, but I understand what motivates people, I understand the fear, I understand the need, and I will, in judging this issue, try to be empathetic to say, if it was my kid at risk, I would do anything and everything to make that child's life better, because that's what's going on. Are there bad people? Are there bad, illegal documented? Yes, there are. And there are bad people who've been here forever, their whole lives too. So let's not generalize. But what I'm saying is we have to have that sense of empathy, that sense of understanding that says, I get it. I may not agree with what you did in crossing that border, but you know what? My heart understands what it must be like. The homeless. Let's talk about the homeless. Chris Leamy, a guest on the show recently, comes from Chicago, well-to-do, comes to Wall Street, gets a contract in New York to sing for Sony Records. And the one thing he notices as he walks around New York are the homeless. And he also knows that he's been pretty richly blessed in life. And he says, I got to do something or my conscience will not rest. And the way in which he comes to understand that is because he imagines, if I wasn't born into the family I was born into, if I didn't have the opportunities and the blessings that I have, might I, but for the grace of God, be one of these people? And so since he has a gift for music, Chris Leamy decides every day he will pull up his guitar next to a homeless person with the guitar case open and he'll sing. And he sings well. That's why he has a Sony contract. And when people see somebody entertaining on the street, they are inclined to be more generous. And he takes the money and he gives half to the homeless person, and he gives half to a shelter for homeless people, and he helps those people to get jobs where he can. My point is that what he did, what made him generous, what made him say every day, let me give an hour to that homeless person I don't know, is by saying to himself one day, can you imagine what it must be like to be parked on a curb with a sense of hopelessness as your companion? And he said, you know, I've heard that phrase growing up, there but for the grace of God go I, but now I was trying to place myself in that role, and it's not a place I wanted to be. Interestingly enough, Pope Francis picked on that recently too, and he said, when we give to the homeless, we have to do something extra. And that something extra is not just to put the dollar in, but to engage them by looking them in the eyes. And he was pinpricking my conscience, because I'll tell you, when I go to New York, I'll give. I give and I quickly walk on by. And yet the Pope says to truly give is to make human contact. It is to look that person in the eye and see the face of Christ in that homeless person, because he lives there too. For us to be sensitive to the concerns, the social concerns of our age, whether it's about infidelity or the undocumented or the person living on the street, we need to enter into their experience, and that's the very essence of divine mercy, to become one with those who are hurting. Let me give another example. Pornography. Okay, big problem, huge. Every therapist I talk to says when they have patients, that's what the client complains about. Dependency and addiction to pornography. It's everywhere. Why? Because it's no longer some movie theater on 42nd Street that dirty old men in raincoats go to. Now it's something, it's as easy as putting on your computer and you can get the worst, most awful pornography. Anybody can get it anytime, anywhere. So what do we do to stop that? Well, you know, they're not going to close down the internet, and the opportunities for that sinful inclination, that addiction, are not going to go away. And so when I deal with, as I do, engaged couples, very often who are very much dependent on pornography, I like to say to them, okay, let's imagine that you put on the computer, you lock the door, and when you put that screen on and you look, you're no longer looking at naked strangers. But on that screen, in that pornographic film, is your son or your daughter, your sister or your brother, your child. How do you feel? And inevitably they say, disgusted, revolted, angry. But the point is, everybody in porn is somebody's sister or brother, is somebody's son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter. If we would not want the people we love to be exploited that way, how can we participate in the exploit of other people? And that's what you do every time you put that computer on. Again, we enter into the experience of what would it be like for me to actually have somebody I love as part of that pornographic world. We're outraged, but it is somebody's family. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You would not want anyone to exploit your family. Do not participate in the exploitation of anybody else's family as well. The only way we become truly instruments of divine mercy is by empathy, and we apply it to these issues. A couple more issues. Abortion. Every one of us has something, everyone in this auditorium has something in common. We all swam around at one point in our mother's womb. The difference, your mother and mine said, I'm so happy, and I want this child, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect it. That hasn't changed. Every kid swimming around in every mother's womb is still an innocent person created by God for a distinct and noble purpose, but somebody now has the right to choose to terminate that life. And just as I hope that you and I are grateful that our moms chose life, then we are called on to remind people, you were once that child in the womb. Somebody gave you a chance. Wouldn't you then want to apply the same standard to the life within you? Shouldn't that child in turn have the same right to life, the same chance to be born, the same protection as a defenseless member of society? And you know, we're living this double standard, this language of illusion to cover up our sins on that issue. You know, when you want a baby, as soon as you find out, my nieces and nephews have recently become pregnant, and it's all, you know, oh my God, we're having a baby from the moment they find out. They can't wait to show those sonogram pictures. And yet, when someone doesn't want to have a child, never call it a baby, call it a choice. Call it a fetus, call it whatever you want, but never call it what it is. You and I are here because someone allowed us not just to swim around inside them, but to be born. Wouldn't we want to offer that same possibility, that same choice, that same gift of life to every child conceived? And one of the things I need to remind people all the time, and I know this is off the point but on, we have 1.2 million abortions every year in this country. At the same time, we have 2 million childless couples who seek to adopt. We have a home and a family and a community of love for every child conceived. There's no such thing as an unwanted child. They're wanted. All we need to do is get them born. And I think one of the ways to get them born is to remind people, you were once that size. I said to my nephew Matthew, how big is this baby your wife is carrying right now? And he said, the size, Uncle Jim, of an avocado. Let the avocados grow. Let the babies be born by remembering That was once us. Would we want this to have been done to us? No. Then how in the name of God do we do it to others? Another example, and this is a tough one, criminals. We all become strongly anti-criminal. Understandably, they do bad things. Interestingly enough, this past year, for whatever reason, God has shared with me the journey of walking with families of people who have sons or daughters in jail. And as you listen to their story, you realize their kids are so much like your kids and my nieces and nephews, but they went astray. But they're not inherently evil. They do and have done evil, stupid things. But they're not unworthy of respect. When you put criminals outside the realm of the human, those people, instead of acknowledging that those people are somebody's son and daughter just like yours and mine. I had a couple, they come to my church every week. They're not from the parish, but they come. They're in retirement now, and their son commits an embarrassing, awful, terrible crime. And they came to me because they said, you know, we want you to talk to him. But I thought to myself, isn't it remarkable that this son, who they thought was normal and just like anybody else, now has put them in this awkward position. They put their house in hock for bail. They've put themselves at risk. They're taking whatever savings they have to pay for a lawyer for this kid. But I was struck by a couple of things. One was that it can happen to any family, but also struck by what you parents are all about. You know, when they took that kid into their life and they carried him into this world, they thought, like every parent does, life will be good. This child will have a wonderful life. Never could they have imagined that this beautiful son of theirs would turn out to be criminal. And I'm always amazed by you guys, and especially by these parents, because they're able to separate out what their son has done, the wrong he's done, with the fact that when we said we would accept him in our life as our child, we said it with no conditions, no ifs, ands, or buts. Do they hate what he did? You know it. They're embarrassed and ashamed. But they have never stopped loving him. And what those parents do, I think we're all called on to do. Separate out the evil things that people choose to do from the person who is still a beloved child of God. Divine mercy says, I loathe what you do, but I will love you, and your crime cannot make me stop caring about you as a human being. Divine mercy is about empathy, or it's about nothing. Last two topics I want to touch on. One would be the whole homosexual thing. You know what the church's teaching is? Homosexual activity, unacceptable. Homosexual person, worthy of dignity and love and respect. Let me tell you, again, in 37 years of priesthood, what I find. I have yet to meet a gay person who says to me, yeah, one day I decided I think I'll be gay. Nobody comes to that by saying, I think I'll choose this. It is, for whatever reason, what they are. And if that's true, and I think it is because they tell me this in the context of confession, I don't think they're lying. If it's true, then aren't we obligated to say, I may disagree with what you do, but again, I will respect who you are as a child of God. And we can't lose that. The gays, sometimes we even talk about them as if they're a disease. The gays, the homos. One of my priests calls them homos. And I said, don't do that, Father. You immediately create a bridge that's broken. No opportunity for communication. I don't want these folks leaving the church because they think the church is no place for them. It is a home to them too, because we have a Jesus at the heart of divine mercy who loves everyone. Let him or her without sin cast the first stone. That's our Savior. So if he's willing to do that, and you and I say we follow him, then we've got to like people even if we don't like what they do. A story. Stories are always a good thing. There was a wonderful family. We had used them on an interview. Jill and Jonathan Wood. Gary Wood, the father, was a quarterback for the Giants many years ago. And one day, Gary and Jill, parents, realized there's something different about Jonathan. So they go from Long Island, they drive to the city to sit down with him. And over lunch, they say, Jonathan, is there something about you and your life that you haven't told us? He's about 24 years old at this point. And he realizes what they're hinting at. And he says to them, Mom and Dad, I think I know what you're asking me, so I'm going to tell you, yes. Yes, I am gay. And the father, the former athlete, he breaks into tears. And Jonathan says, Dad, This is not what I wanted. This is not what I have chosen. Believe me, it would be so much easier to be straight. This is who I am, but I hope you're not crying with embarrassment or shame. I didn't mean to hurt you. This isn't something I've chosen. And his father stopped crying long enough to say, Jonathan, I'm not crying because you're gay. I'm crying because for the past 24 years, you couldn't tell the people who love you the most in the world who you really are. And you should have known that whoever you are, we would never stop loving you. Gary Wood was identifying the heart and soul of divine mercy. I don't like what you do. I don't like the choices you've made, perhaps, but I can't stop loving you because you are a gift to God, from God to me. The other example I used, and I think it's something we can all relate to, is the sins of the church in terms of abuse. You know, I can't believe, and I've said some of this to you before, as a priest, for me, the most difficult thing in 37 years was acknowledging the scandals of the church. I can't believe that it happened, but I know it did. I know it's only 4% of priests and 96% of priests are good, but it breaks my heart. And when I find a priest or a bishop who doesn't seem to get it, who still doesn't think it's a terrible thing, I always know I'm dealing with someone who doesn't have any relationship with children, who doesn't have a niece or nephew, who, unlike you, is not a mother or father. And they don't get it sometimes, some of them. They don't understand, because you can't love kids and then see kids exploited by priests or anybody, and then the cover-up from up above. The only way that happened is the bishops and priests didn't have a sense of what it would be like to hurt a kid. Somewhere along the line, they never knew what it was to love a child. Because you can't love a child without wanting that child to be protected. And whether it's the individual priest with his sickness or the bishops who, to protect the corporation, would move these bad priests from one place to another, whatever the reason, it's sinful and it was wrong, and it reflects a church that was out of touch with empathy. Oh, we have great sympathy for anyone abused. Don't give me your sympathy. No, because you love your nieces, your nephews, your sons, your daughters. No, this child must always be protected. And anyone who won't protect the child certainly has no sense of empathy, no sense of divine mercy. We follow the Jesus who said, "Woe to him who hurts the little ones. Better a millstone should be tied around his neck than you hurt the little ones." And yet, we belong to a church that allowed the harm to little ones time and time again. Why? I think because of a lack of empathy, because of a lack of true understanding of divine mercy. Just as you would not wish ever for anyone to do wrong to you, how in God's name can you tolerate wrong done to another? We are called on to be sincere, to be authentic, to be empathetic, to be true. I know I've told you this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's a good reminder to me. When my nieces and nephews were young and small, they would always come with me to church and listen to my homilies. And then the deal was that on the way out of church, I'd put them in my car, take them for breakfast, but they couldn't have anything on the menu unless they could tell me what I said in the homily. I gave this one homily that I thought was pretty good about custody of the tongue. You know, don't curse, don't lie, don't swear, don't be angry, don't be nasty. And I got in the car, and as I'm driving with them in the car, somebody cuts me off. I cut the person off. We get into this match on the road, and the words coming out of my mouth. Not good. Anthony, 9 years old. God bless Anthony. Uncle Jim, can I ask you a question? He says from the back seat. Anthony, I'm busy right now, cutting the man off. Uncle Jim, I want to ask you a question. What? What is it, Anthony? Do you even listen to your homilies? When we get ordained, the bishop says to us, mean what you say. practice what you preach. You and I are going to leave this place as identifiable Christians, I hope. And they will see it not just in our sympathy for others, but in our empathy. I want them to say of you as they say of me, I hope someday, I see that person, I see another Christ. Because what Jesus was able to do was to enter into the mystery of the suffering, the pain, even the sinfulness of other people. He got why they sinned and called them from it. Not by judgment and condemnation, but by loving them. Before I close, you know, I did something last year that some people liked. I hope some people will like it today. The cradle of mercy, the cradle of empathy is the family and married life. If you are blessed to be here right now with your spouse, I want you to stand with them right now. Spouses, husbands and wives, please stand. And I'd like you guys, if you would, to please face each other. And if you can, if you don't mind, would you hold hands? There's never enough renewal. Here we go. Listen to what I'm about to ask you to do. I'm going to ask for 3 yeses if you can. These are the 3 questions you were asked on the day you got married. First question, in choosing to be married again to each other, are you doing it freely and of your own will? Second question, do you promise before God that you will forever love, honor, and respect each other as husband and wife? If God has blessed you with children or grandchildren, do you promise to love them unconditionally and by your example, teach them the way of Jesus Christ? Okay, now husbands, I'm going to say I'm going to pause, you put in your name, take you, and you better get her name right. And we'll go from there. All right, husbands, here we go. I take you once again to be my wife. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. And now, wives, I take you to be my husband. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. You've declared your consent before God and God's people. May the Lord in His goodness strengthen your consent and fill you both with His blessings. What God has joined together, mankind must never divide. And to that, let's all say aloud and clear, amen. Let's hear for the